Back in high school, Caleb first discovered his passion for building while helping his dad and their family-run construction business. Summers were spent under the sun, learning the grit and grind of manual labor, lessons that laid the foundation for his future career. Those days were more than just work. They were moments of connection with his parents, filled with late-night blueprint discussions at the kitchen table, where dreams took shape over coffee and smudged paper. Lacey, in contrast, came from a lively suburban world where adventure meant weekend hikes and long road trips to national parks. Her thirst for excitement was stoked early on, and it was during those family getaways that she bonded with Maddie and Riley, two girls who would become her lifelong partners in crime. The trio's friendship was built on wild plans and shared secrets, and they clung to that dynamic like it was sacred. Everything shifted for Caleb when a devastating car crash took both of his parents. He was left in the wreckage of grief, forced to shut down the family business and liquidate what little was left. The sale barely scratched the surface of their debts. All he had to his name was a lonely plot of land and an aging shed, his solitary sanctuary when life felt too heavy. Meanwhile, Lacey was thriving in college. She embraced the freedom it offered, stretching her wings without a second glance back. Her adventurous streak only intensified as she and her friends meticulously pieced together the ultimate summer road trip, an escape full of promise and unfiltered fun. Their paths finally crossed during Caleb's first semester at community college. The spark between them was undeniable, though their personalities couldn't have been more different. Caleb, grounded and methodical, clashed with Lacey's impulsive energy. Still, they bonded over a mutual drive to chase their individual goals. Despite their mismatched temperaments, something clicked. Caleb admired Lacey's fierce energy, and she was drawn to his quiet dependability. But as their engagement moved forward, those differences began to chafe. Beneath the surface, tension simmered. One evening, as they drove to a show for their usual date night, Caleb mentioned a simple idea, a week-long camping trip after her semester wrapped up. Just the two of them. He barely finished his sentence when Lacey cut him off with a scoff. "Caleb, come on. You know I'm leaving the day after finals. Maddie, Riley, and I are basically packed already. This trip has been planned forever." Caleb's stomach twisted. He clenched the steering wheel tighter. "Wait, you're seriously still going? After we got engaged, I thought we agreed. You weren't gonna go. What changed?" Lacey folded her arms with practiced defiance. "I never agreed to cancel, Caleb. Don't twist things. This trip was in the works before we even started dating. We scraped together every dime, even fudged some receipts to squeeze extra cash out of our parents. You think I'm just gonna toss that away because you're suddenly insecure?" His patience snapped. "I know what your friends are like on these trips. They sponge off people and they cross lines. I don't want you partying all summer, especially not with them." Lacey's eyes flashed with fury. "Don't you dare go after my friends. They've always had my back, unlike you right now. And let's not pretend your little military weekends aren't time away too. What's the difference?" Caleb's jaw clenched. "The difference? Mine's for work. It's professional. I'm not out getting wasted or hooking up with strangers. But if you go on this trip, we're through. I'm serious. Even if you don't mean to mess up, it only takes one night, one drink, one bad decision. Is that risk worth losing me?" Lacey's voice softened, but her words felt rehearsed. "Caleb, come on. You're my guy. Always have been. I'll be back before you know it. Then we'll pick a date and get married. Nothing's changing." Caleb didn't budge. "If you leave, we're done. I won't be waiting around while you're off playing tourist with two girls who treat commitment like a joke. Make your choice." The rest of the night passed in a blur. They sat through the movie, but Caleb barely noticed a thing. His mind raced, circling Lacey's words, remembering every moment she'd dismissed his feelings before. Afterward, he skipped their usual post-show snack run. He drove straight to her place, silent the whole way. At the door, she tried to pull him back. "Caleb? What's going on? You're not coming in? We didn't even eat. I thought we'd spend the night together." He shook his head. "Not tonight. Maybe not ever again. You need to think about what you really want. But if you take that trip, don't expect to find me waiting. You won't see me in your house again, or your bed." He turned and walked away. Lacey trailed him, raising her voice. "Caleb, you didn't even kiss me goodnight. Why are you being like this?" He didn't answer. As he reached his truck, she shouted after him, "Fine. Be mad. I'm still going. And when I get back, we'll set a wedding date, so get over it." She slammed the door behind her as he drove off into the night. Inside the house, Maddie and Riley were lounging on the couch, grinning like they already knew the outcome. Maddie chuckled. Didn't go too well, huh? Lacey shrugged like it was nothing. He'll come crawling back. He always does. Honestly, he knows he'll never find someone better than me. With a smirk, she added, but if I ever catch him cheating, he'll regret it for the rest of his life. Riley raised an eyebrow. Kinda rich, don't you think? Considering last weekend? Shut up, Lacey snapped. I don't share my man. Maddie laughed. Please. You had no issue sharing Austin with me last week. Lacey rolled her eyes. That was different. Austin's a nobody. Caleb's my fiancé. He actually matters. Now Butte or Bozeman first? I'm in the mood for a cowboy before we hit any more city boys. Caleb didn't call, didn't text. He kept his silence as her departure date came and went. The next morning, needing closure, he drove to her apartment. It was empty. Still unsure, he burned through more gas to drive 100 miles to her parents' house. He needed confirmation. When he arrived, Lacey was gone, just like he suspected. He returned her things anyway, box after box of reminders of a life he was no longer part of. Her father, clearly fed up with her choices too, helped carry them in, silent and grim. After a quick handshake, Caleb walked back into his now empty apartment. At 24, 2 years older than Lacey, he had just finished his associate's degree in construction management and was now working toward a bachelor's in project management. He hoped to eventually launch his own construction firm. A staff sergeant in the National Guard, Caleb balanced reserve pay, part-time jobs, and the GI Bill, managing to stay debt-free. His life wasn't luxurious, but it was stable and entirely his own. When his parents died in a car accident, their family construction business collapsed. Selling off the assets paid off some debts, but all that remained was an 80-acre piece of land with a shed and a quiet stream. Caleb sometimes camped there to clear his head. But after dropping Lacey's belongings off at her childhood home, something shifted. He was done with the city, done with apartment living, and most of all, done waiting around for someone who clearly didn't value him. He packed up his things and moved permanently to the land he'd inherited, setting up shop in the old shed. Initially, his days were filled with aimless fishing, long swims, and too much beer. He sank into self-pity, haunted by the way Lacey had laughed off his concerns, dismissed his feelings, and bolted for her road trip like it was the only thing that mattered. After a week of spiraling, he forced himself to snap out of it. He got back into shape, sticking to his exercise routine to maintain his readiness for military duty. But with too much time and not enough purpose, Caleb grew restless. One day, while walking past the machine shed, he noticed the old tractor still in working order. The planting season was nearing its end, but there was just enough time left for a late batch of soybeans. He figured if he could keep himself busy and maybe earn a little money, it would be worth the effort. He hooked up the plow and started tilling. Midway through the job, his neighbor Mr. McMillan pulled up, curious. Soybeans this late? McMillan asked from his truck window. Figured I'd give it a try, Caleb replied. Short-season beans should still work. McMillan nodded. You'd save time using no-till. Most of us do. I've got a no-till drill you can borrow. Just don't wreck it. Caleb paused. Never used no-till before. It's easy, McMillan explained. Mow the grass, hit it with Roundup, plant Roundup-ready beans. Spray again after they sprout, and that's it. Same deal if you switch to corn or wheat next year. Caleb thought it over. It sounded a lot simpler and more efficient than the old method, and efficiency was exactly what he needed. He spent the next 4 days mowing and clearing debris, smoothing the soil with his disc. When he was ready, he stopped by McMillan Place. Morning, Mr. McMillan. Still good to borrow the drill? Caleb asked. Call me Roy, the older man said, grinning. You're a grown man. A sergeant, too, from what I hear. Caleb chuckled. Out here. I'm just Caleb. Fair enough, Roy said. Let's get you hooked up. With Roy's help, Caleb got the drill running. 2 days later, the soybeans were in the ground. He returned the drill and sent soil samples to the county extension office. The field didn't need lime, and fertilizer needs were low. He picked up the right mix from the co-op and applied it himself, feeling like he was finally rebuilding something of his own. After 2 weeks of hard work, Caleb sat outside the shed, his new home, listening to the gentle stream and distant farm equipment. It was peaceful, but Lacey still lingered in his mind. Where was she? Who was she with? Doubts that had been quietly festering for months now surged forward. He remembered her flirty behavior, the way she danced too close to other guys, even when he was around. During past deployments, friends had warned him. Some said they saw her out with other men, acting more like she was on a date than waiting for her fiancé. One buddy even sent him a blurry photo. Lacey, of course, had explanations ready for every situation, and Caleb had been naive enough to believe her. But now, with distance and silence between them, the truth hit hard. He didn't trust her anymore. And worse, he was beginning to question whether he ever really loved her, or if he just loved the idea of her. Her choice to prioritize a self-indulgent trip with her friends, and her smug attitude about it, revealed more than he wanted to admit. It wasn't just the trip that stung. It was the lack of respect. The way she made him feel like a fool for even suggesting they spend time together before she left. It was the way she dismissed his concerns as insecurity, rather than valid emotions from someone she claimed to love. Caleb made a decision. He wouldn't contact her when she returned. No calls, no texts, no visits. She didn't even know where his land was, not really. And if she wanted to find him, she'd have to make an effort, prove she was worth it. In the meantime, he stayed busy. Outside of his reserved duties, Caleb focused on his land. He converted part of the garage into a modest workshop, fixed up machinery, and planted a small vegetable garden. The shed was cool and comfortable for summer, but he knew it wouldn't be enough come winter. He briefly considered moving back to the city if he re-enrolled in college. But the thought of leaving this land, this space he'd carved out for himself, felt wrong. It was more than property now. It was healing. It was home. No matter how cold the winter got, Caleb would find a way to stay. The cave had always been a quiet retreat, tucked into a rocky bluff with a stunning view of the woods and stream below. Caleb had often thought of turning it into something more, and now, with no one left to please but himself, he finally had the time. Using concrete blocks and stones, he envisioned sealing the front with a strong wall and building out a proper entrance. Years ago, he'd even run electrical lines there, back when he first thought he'd use the land more seriously. Utilities wouldn't be a problem. Roughly 30 by 15 feet, the space was manageable. A concrete floor would level it out, and with the right tools and effort, it could become a warm winter hideaway. At sunrise the next day, Caleb drove into town and started placing orders: sand, gravel, and cement for pouring concrete and mortar, plus lumber, triple-pane windows, a steel door, and roofing material for a simple porch. By noon, he was back at the site, ready to get to work. He chuckled at calling it a cave. It was more of a wide, weathered overhang, but it had potential. His plan was simple: close off the front and back with sturdy walls and install a secure door for storage access. The materials were delivered the next day, and Caleb got right to it. He drilled rebar deep into the rock face, poured concrete for the porch base, and leveled the inside floor. After letting the initial layer cure, he filled in the porch area with gravel, poured the final slab, and started framing walls. With his tractor handling the heavy lifting, it took just over a week. One afternoon, while smoothing the concrete, Caleb spotted someone cutting hay in the nearby field, moving fast. When the tractor finally stopped by the stream, he was surprised to see a woman hop down, splash into the water, and cool off like she owned the place. Curious, he kept working but watched out of the corner of his eye. A few minutes later, she approached. "Hey there," she said with a warm smile. "I'm Nora Bennett. What are you doing with the old bluff?" Caleb wiped his hands on a rag and smiled back. "Fixing it up. Just wrapping up the porch now. No offense, but I need to finish this layer before it sets wrong." "Fair enough," she replied, grinning. "I used to play here as a kid. Mind if I look around?" "Help yourself," Caleb said. "I'll catch up with you down by the creek, fully dressed, now that I've got company." Nora laughed. "Glad to hear it. Otherwise, I might have had to put my combat training to use." Caleb raised an eyebrow. "Combat? You're military." "Retired staff sergeant. I was a medic. Took a hit during a mission and got out. Now I help on my folks' farm, and I'm looking into becoming an EMT." Caleb nodded, his respect clear. "I'm in the reserves, staff sergeant too. Couple of deployments under my belt. This land was my grandpa's. My parents died in a car wreck, and this is all I had left. Been trying to make something out of it ever since." Nora tilted her head. "So, it's just you out here? No one waiting on you?" Caleb gave a half-smile. "Was engaged. She picked partying with her friends over building a life with me. She's out west somewhere, probably chasing sunsets and city boys. I'd like to meet someone eventually, but I'm not in a rush. If it happens, it happens." They talked a while longer, swapping stories and finding easy rapport. Eventually, Nora sighed and looked toward the distant tree line. "I should get back." Chores don't do themselves. Mind if I swing by now and then? The creek's perfect for cooling off. Be my guest, Caleb replied. Just make a little noise when you show up. I like to swim, with minimal gear. Nora chuckled. Well, now I'm tempted to sneak up on you. Could be fun catching you off guard. With a wink, she turned and walked back to her tractor. A couple of days later, Nora returned. She raked hay into neat rows with practiced ease, parked near the stream, stripped to a swimsuit, and waded in. Caleb, up on the bluff working on the front wall, glanced down occasionally. When he finished for the day, he grabbed a pool noodle and headed down. Mind if I join? He asked. Not at all, she said, flashing a grin. They floated, chatted, and laughed until Caleb excused himself to get back to work. Before he left, he invited her up for a cold beer. From then on, it became a little routine. Nora would swing by after farm work, take a swim, then sit on the porch with Caleb, talking and sipping drinks as the sun went down. Weeks passed, and Caleb's cave home took real shape. He built a 2-level interior, a small kitchen, a cozy lounge area, a wood stove for heat, and even a bathroom. The whole build cost him just under $3,700, a miracle, considering how comfortable it turned out. As hay season slowed, Nora's visits became less frequent. But when she didn't show, Caleb noticed. He missed her company in a way that surprised him. One evening, floating in the stream with the late summer breeze brushing his skin, Caleb finally spoke up. Hey, you want to grab dinner sometime? Like, an actual date? Nora's brow arched. You're joking. Not at all, Caleb said, his tone soft. But if it's not something you're into, I understand. Seeing he was serious, Nora's expression shifted. I didn't mean to laugh. It just caught me off guard. You've always treated me like one of the guys. I'm different now. Scarred up, limping a little, and I haven't dated since I got hurt. Caleb looked her in the eye. I don't care about any of that. I like you, who you are now. You're strong, funny, real. If someone can't see how incredible that is, that's their loss. Nora's smile returned, softer this time. She wasn't in love with him, not yet. But for the first time in a long time, she felt like she could be. As autumn turned the leaves gold and red, Caleb and Nora spent more time together. She helped him stain the porch, showed him how to prep vegetables from his garden, and slowly warmed to the idea of something more between them. One spring afternoon, they sat side by side on the porch, beers in hand, watching dark clouds roll in. The air turned heavy, the wind picked up, and thunder echoed in the distance. Just as Caleb turned to say something, a deafening roar filled the air, and the porch roof began to shake violently. The moment the porch began to rattle, Caleb jumped to his feet and grabbed Nora's arm. Tornado, he shouted over the rising wind. We've got to get inside now. Without hesitation, he pulled her into the reinforced storage room tucked in the back of his cave home. Slamming the door shut behind them, they huddled together on the floor. The roar outside grew deafening. Somewhere, glass shattered. Then, just as suddenly, the noise vanished into an eerie, hollow silence. They waited in that silence for 10 long minutes before Caleb cautiously unlatched the door. Stay close, he told Nora, leading her into the living area. The damage was immediately obvious. A front window had exploded inward, and part of the porch roof now lay half-submerged in rainwater on the floor. His bed was soaked at the edges, and muddy debris littered every corner. Caleb stepped outside into the soft drizzle. The porch roof was gone, ripped clean off. His machine shed had been flattened, its roof pancaked over the equipment inside. All around, trees were split, snapped, or torn from the ground entirely. Nora joined him, slipping an arm around his waist and leaning her head against his shoulder. Oh, Caleb, she whispered. I'm so sorry. Together, they walked toward what was left of the shed. As they rounded the bluff, they spotted their trucks. Both had taken hits from debris. Nora's windshield was cracked and starred, likely hit by a large branch or metal shard. Her truck might still start, but it wasn't safe to drive. The shed was a mess. Large equipment lay crumpled beneath twisted metal, while tools and scrap were scattered across the grass. It wasn't a total loss. Some pieces of siding and roof remained, but most of the structure had given way. Wanting a better view of the storm's path, Caleb and Nora climbed to the top of the bluff. From there, Nora froze. Her grip tightened around Caleb's arm. Oh no, she gasped. Caleb, the storm hit our farm too. Look at it. The house, the barns, everything's wrecked. Without another word, she turned and ran for her truck, limping but determined. Caleb caught up quickly. Hold on, he said firmly. You can't drive with that windshield. We'll take my truck. They scrambled through what was left of Caleb's shed, grabbing essential tools, chainsaw, fuel, ropes, pry bars, a come-along, and chains. With everything loaded up, Caleb took the wheel and began the drive to Nora's family farm. It should have taken 10 minutes. It took 45. They had to stop twice to clear fallen trees. The road was barely passable. When they finally arrived, Nora's worst fears were confirmed. The damage matched what they'd seen from the bluff. The house had partially collapsed. The barns were shredded. What hadn't caved and had been peeled apart. Nora ran through the wreckage, shouting for her parents, her voice rising with panic. Caleb followed, eyes scanning every shadow for movement. Then, a faint cry. They followed the sound to where part of the house had crumbled over a damaged cellar door. A tree lay across the corner. Caleb reversed his truck close and cut through the trunk, working fast. Beneath the debris, he found the door wedged shut against broken concrete. Nora shouted for her parents again as Caleb pried it open. They rushed down the stairs. At the bottom, Nora collapsed into her parents' arms in a tearful reunion. Caleb stood close by, flashlight in hand, offering quiet support. When Nora's father, Walter, climbed out and saw the destruction, his face fell. Nora and her mother flanked him, holding him steady. "It's getting dark," Caleb said gently, "and the rain's coming back. Come stay with me tonight. My place isn't fancy, but it's dry, warm, and safe. We'll figure out next steps in the morning." They agreed. Back at Caleb's, Nora and her mother used the wood stove to prepare a simple meal. The conversation that night was subdued but hopeful. Caleb insisted they stay as long as needed. The next morning, they divided responsibilities. Nora and Walter headed back to their farm to see what could be salvaged. Caleb drove into town to pick up supplies and check on insurance. He bought a new window, porch roofing materials, and filed a claim for the damages. The adjuster promised to visit both properties within a couple of days. In the meantime, Caleb was authorized to seal broken windows and prevent further loss, but told to hold off on rebuilding. Back home, he installed the new window and got to work clearing the machine shed. It was slow going, but by afternoon, he'd freed the tractor. The sheet metal was dented, but otherwise, it ran fine. Thankfully, he'd taken out an insurance policy that covered the land, the equipment, and his home. That evening, Nora and Walter returned with more supplies, a mattress, blankets, canned food, and an old generator to keep their deep freeze running. Caleb brought out his own generator to power lights and appliances until the grid was back online, maybe another day or two, based on local reports. That night, the little home on the bluff became something more. A haven. A shared space of resilience, laughter, and survival. Over the next 10 days, Caleb barely slowed down. The insurance adjuster arrived as promised and, after assessing the site, approved a $100,000 claim to rebuild the machine shed and 2 smaller outbuildings. The funds would cover new materials and a contractor to help speed up the process. Nora's family received a similar assessment, though it would take time to sort through the specifics of their larger loss. But for now, they had shelter. They had food. They had each other. And despite everything that had been torn down, something new had quietly begun to rise. Caleb's insurance settlement came through quickly, $15,000 for machinery damage and $7,500 for home repairs. Since the payout included labor costs, and Caleb planned to do nearly all the work himself, he knew he could stretch it far. He didn't just want to rebuild, he wanted to expand. His plan was ambitious but simple. He'd incorporate the existing 12 by 30-foot porch into the main living space and build a new wraparound porch on 3 sides. He envisioned the old cave section as his bedroom, with the new addition housing a cozy living room, a kitchen, and a small office. He also planned a larger bathroom with access from both the bedroom and main area. He spent 2 days digging footings, using salvaged materials from storm-damaged buildings to build the formwork. Even before the funds landed in his account, he had concrete poured. Once the money hit, he dove into construction full force. When he explained the plans to Nora and her parents, they were fully supportive. Caleb chose concrete for the new walls, planning to veneer them with stone. It would cost more upfront, but offer better insulation and protection from future storms. With his experience working with concrete in the military, he estimated the walls would run around $2,500. He rented the necessary equipment and poured the walls within a week. They cured smoothly, and he was just about to begin roofing when everything changed. His phone rang. Orders from the reserve unit. Caleb was being deployed to Afghanistan for a year. Though the extra income was welcome, the timing was hard to swallow. The project he'd poured his heart into would have to wait. That evening, he sat Nora and her parents down. "I've got to go," he said simply. Nora's reaction was instant. "Oh crap," she muttered before pulling him into a fierce hug. He reassured them they could stay at his place for as long as needed while they rebuilt. Their new home, a steel-framed structure on a concrete pad, was still in its early stages, waiting for the builder to begin work. While they waited, they kept busy repairing outbuildings and maintaining the farm. But the night before Caleb left, something unexpected happened. He woke to find Nora slipping into his bed, quiet but purposeful. Before he could speak, she kissed him, long, deep, and full of intent. He whispered, "Nora, we can't. Your parents are right here. They'll hear us." "I don't care," she said, firm and steady. "Mom knows. I'm sure Dad does too. I want this night. I'm not taking no for an answer." Despite his initial protest, her certainty overrode his hesitation. She straddled him, and soon their quiet night turned passionate, too loud to be mistaken for anything else. When they finally fell asleep tangled in each other's arms, dawn wasn't far off. The next morning, June greeted Caleb with a warm, knowing smile as he stumbled groggily into the kitchen. Setting down 3 mugs of coffee, she chuckled. "I was wondering when you two would stop pretending. We can see how much you care for each other, Caleb. Nora's an adult. If she chooses to share her nights with a man we deeply respect, then that's her choice." Caleb smiled, grateful for her grace, and more than a little relieved. Later that day, Nora and her parents watched from the porch as Caleb packed up his truck. Nora would drive it back to the farm after he reported in. He'd added her name to his checking account, so she could handle bills and expenses while he was gone. She and Walter had also agreed to maintain the land during his absence. The next 3 days were a blur of mobilization, paperwork, gear inspections, final loadouts. Equipment too large to carry was already stationed in the operational zone. Smaller tools had been shipped ahead. To Caleb's surprise, Nora and her parents showed up at the bus station on departure day. As he boarded, he turned to see Nora standing with tears in her eyes but a proud smile on her face. Once at the mobilization center, Caleb and his unit went through the usual pre-deployment grind: medical and dental evaluations, legal briefings, weapon quals, refresher training. During a legal update, Caleb quietly amended his will, naming Nora as sole beneficiary. He didn't mention it to her. If something happened, he wanted her to be taken care of. After 3 weeks of intensive prep, his combat engineer unit boarded transport bound for Kazakhstan. From there, they deployed into the Afghan theater, relieving another unit already in place. Temperatures soared above 130 degrees Fahrenheit. The landscape was harsh, dusty, dry, and unforgiving. But Caleb's team didn't slow down. Days bled into nights as they cleared IED-laced routes, built schools, reinforced bases, and improved roads for both military use and local communities. It wasn't glamorous work. It was dirty, dangerous, grueling. They took enemy fire more than once. Locals spat at them, shouted insults, or offered wary silence. The job was relentless, but Caleb endured it the only way he knew how: head down, heart steady. And through it all, Nora remained on his mind. Her voice, her stubborn confidence, her warmth. She had slipped into his life at the perfect time, when he was still reeling from Lacey's betrayal, unsure if he'd ever trust again. But Nora didn't need convincing. She just needed a chance. Back home, she kept the land running, repaired fences, checked equipment, paid bills. She'd promised to hold down the fort, and Caleb believed her. Whatever came next, he knew this. His life had changed before he left, and when he came home, he'd be returning to something real. Deployment was grueling. Caleb both thrived under the intensity and resented the unrelenting pace. The danger, the dust, the brutal heat, he lived in a rhythm of adrenaline and exhaustion. Yet amid the chaos, one thing grounded him: his calls with Nora. They talked as often as time and signal allowed. The conversations deepened with each week, less about the weather, more about life. The word love began surfacing, tentative at first, then more certain. Caleb found himself thinking about her constantly. He wrestled with the truth of his feelings. Was it love, friendship, or just physical longing? Whatever it was, it felt deeper and more honest than anything he'd ever shared with Lacey. 3/4 through the deployment, everything changed. While working on a mountain road project, Caleb's unit came under sudden fire from insurgents. The firefight was intense, lasting nearly 30 minutes. When the platoon sergeant was hit, Caleb, next in line, immediately stepped up, taking control. He rallied the men, organized their defense, and assessed the terrain. Then the platoon leader was also wounded, leaving Caleb fully in charge. Spotting a break in the enemy's firing pattern, he made a bold call. With 13 soldiers, he led a charge through a weakened sector of the line. Just as they advanced, air support arrived, attack helicopters pounding enemy positions with precision fire. Within minutes, the insurgents retreated. Reinforcements rolled in shortly after to help secure the area and evacuate the wounded. Caleb's leadership didn't go unnoticed. He remained platoon sergeant for the rest of the deployment, earning deep respect from his team. By the time they returned home, Caleb had been promoted to E7 and awarded the Bronze Star for valor under fire. The homecoming was electric. The moment their plane touched down, cheers erupted. Families lined the runway, waving flags and holding signs. Caleb barely had time to skin the crowd before Nora came barreling into him, launching into his arms. "I missed you so much," she exclaimed, clinging to him like she'd never let go. "I've got your truck. What do you want to do first?" "It's almost lunchtime." Caleb laughed, holding her tight. "I want pizza. Real pizza. Then steak. I've dreamed about both since I left. Let's hit House of Pizza. After that, just take me home and let me sleep for a day." At the restaurant, they slipped into Caleb's favorite corner booth. As they held hands and caught up, a waitress approached. Caleb's smile faded the instant he saw her. It was Lacey. Visibly pregnant, she gasped, dropping her notepad. "Caleb? Oh my God, it's you. Where have you been? I've missed you so much." She moved toward him with open arms. Caleb instinctively leaned away. His voice was cool. "Hi, Lacey. I see you've moved on. Or is that baby a souvenir from partying with your friends?" Her expression crumpled. She spun on her heel and fled into the kitchen. A different waitress appeared moments later, clearly annoyed. Caleb looked at Nora, uneasy. "Maybe we should go," he said quietly. "I lost my appetite." Nora nodded. "Same." She leaned in and kissed him. "I'll meet you outside. I just need the restroom first." As Nora disappeared, the waitress shot her a venomous glare and stomped off. Caleb waited near the front, but raised voices from the back hallway made him tense. He edged closer and turned the corner just in time to hear Lacey's voice, nasty and biting. "I don't know what you think you're doing with my fiancé, you pathetic little cripple. I know his unit was deployed, but now that he's back, he's mine. Step aside, sweetheart." Nora laughed coldly. "Your fiancé? Honey, Caleb wouldn't take you back if you were the last woman on Earth. You ditched him for a road trip with trashy friends and expected him to wait? Please." She glanced pointedly at Lacey's belly. "What's this? Your idea of a trap? Hoping he'll play daddy? Or is that just one of your road trip souvenirs?" Her voice dropped into a calm, razor-sharp tone. "You're done here. Get back to the kitchen or go find another guy to manipulate." Caleb's mind. Lacey sputtered, but Nora stepped closer, her voice steely. "And just so you know, I'm a retired staff sergeant. I've faced worse than you. Don't give me a reason to regret being polite." Without another word, Nora brushed past her and returned to Caleb, her cheeks slightly flushed but her composure intact. She slipped her arm through his and smiled. "Sorry about that. I hope I didn't overstep, but she had it coming. Let's go home. I'm done with this place." On the drive back, Nora grew noticeably fidgety, bouncing her leg, glancing out the window, fiddling with her fingers. Caleb noticed. "You okay?" he asked. "You've been acting weird since town." Nora hesitated. "Okay, don't be mad. I may have spent more of your money than you expected while you were gone." Caleb frowned, glancing over. "What do you mean?" "Mom and Dad thought it was a good idea. I kind of went all in. You'll see." They turned onto the gravel drive, and Caleb slowed to a crawl. He stared at the sight ahead in disbelief. His home stood tall and finished. The roof was complete. A beautiful wraparound porch now hugged three sides. The stone veneer sparkled in the sunlight. Flower beds lined the perimeter, and the yard had been landscaped with care. Caleb parked, stunned. Nora bit her lip. "Surprise," she said, sheepish. He stepped out slowly, taking it all in. "You did all this?" Nora nodded. "With some help. Your parents' old contacts. A few neighbors. I wanted it ready when you got back. You deserved it." Caleb turned to her, his voice full of awe. "It's perfect." And it was. More than just a house, it was a symbol of everything that had changed. Not just the storm or the deployment, but who Caleb had become, and who he'd chosen to share his life with. Caleb sat in stunned silence, staring at his property. The machine shed had been rebuilt, larger than before, and everything looked clean, orderly, and well-crafted. But as the shock wore off, unease crept in. His stomach twisted. "Nora," he said, voice tight, "this looks like you spent every dime of my insurance money, and probably some of my army pay. You knew I planned to do the work myself to save costs. I didn't want to burn through everything." Before he could continue, Nora interrupted, shaking her head. "No, Caleb. We didn't spend it all, not even close. Everything we did was exactly what you planned. And we didn't pay for labor. My parents and I, along with some neighbors and friends, did the work ourselves." Caleb blinked. "Everyone pitched in," she said. "Because you're our local hero. Just come see for yourself before getting upset." She grabbed his hand and pulled him from the truck, leading him to the house with infectious energy. At the door, she motioned him toward the new addition, built exactly where the old porch had stood. Inside, she led him to his desk, powered on the computer, and handed him his bankbook. Once the software loaded, she opened a file showing every receipt, transaction, and record. Caleb scrolled in disbelief. His accounts were solid. Nora had spent less than half of what he'd estimated for materials alone. "How?" he muttered. "You did all of this, and spent this little?" Nora smiled proudly. "We made some calls. When people heard you were deployed in Afghanistan and rebuilding after a tornado, they went above and beyond. Discounts, donated materials, you name it. Everyone wanted to help." She gave his hand a squeeze. "Come on. Let me show you the machine shed and workshop. You'll love it. And after that, we're heading to Mom and Dad's. They've been dying to see you." Still reeling, Caleb followed her into the yard. The machine shed was perfect. His layout, his specs, maybe even better. Compressed air lines ran to all the right stations. A maintenance pit had been installed, complete with a safety cover. Everything was streamlined and solid. Outside, Nora pointed out where tornado-damaged trees had been cleared. A new firewood shed stood behind the house, keeping their winter supply dry and protected. Back inside, Nora led him to the bedroom carved from the old cave. As the door closed behind them, her expression softened. She stepped in close, wrapping her arms around his neck and kissing him, gentle at first, then deeper. Clothes hit the floor in a trail to the bed. Their passion was unrestrained, years of longing and love bursting to the surface. Caleb surrendered to it, emotion, gratitude, desire, all surging at once. Afterward, they lay tangled together. Nora rested her head on his chest, her leg draped across him. "I missed you more than I can say," she whispered. "I love you, Caleb. I thought about you every day you were gone." He kissed her forehead. "I love you too, Nora. I didn't understand what real love was until you. I thought I loved Lacey, but this? It's completely different. Whether we're working, relaxing, or making love, it's just better with you. Life is better because of you." Later, while Nora slept peacefully, Caleb slipped out of bed, grabbed a cold Dos Equis, and stepped onto the new porch. He sank into a chair and looked out over his land. Cattle lowed in the distance. A dog barked from a neighboring property. The creek beside the house trickled softly, blending with the buzz of insects and far-off machinery. It was home. It was his again. He didn't even notice Nora had joined him until she stepped outside, completely bare, her skin catching the soft glow of morning light. Her eyes sparkled. Caleb stared at her with awe. "You're stunning," he said quietly. "I love you so much." Nora's eyes glistened. "No, I'm not. I've got scars. Too many." Caleb pulled her into his lap. "Those scars are proof of your strength, of everything you've endured and overcome. They don't take away from you. They add to you. You're beautiful, Nora. Perfect." She smiled through her tears. "Sit with me a while," he said. "I want to soak in this moment before we head to your parents' place." On the drive to the Bennett farm, Caleb took in the land he'd missed for so long. The storm's aftermath was still evident. Tangles of broken trees, patches of destruction, but life was slowly returning. Some areas had been cleared and replanted. Others were still scarred. Nature was healing on its own time. At the farm, he noticed how much had changed. Their new home, though simpler than the old two-story one, stood strong. A metal structure with a small porch had replaced the charming house the tornado had destroyed. The barns were rebuilt, and the property was alive with signs of recovery. Walter met Caleb with a solid handshake and a grin. "Welcome home, Sergeant," he said warmly. "We're all glad you made it back safe." June wrapped him in a tight hug, holding him for a long moment before stepping back. "Dinner's ready," she said with a knowing smile. And I baked your favorite. As they walked inside, Caleb glanced back at Nora. She smiled, taking his hand in hers. For the first time in years, he felt completely at peace. Maybe now, Caleb thought, these women of mine can finally stop worrying and get a decent night's sleep. After a hearty meal, the four of them, Caleb, Nora, Walter, and June, sat on the porch under a canopy of stars. Laughter came easily, the conversation light. But as the clock crept toward 9 p.m., fatigue hit Caleb like a wall. He stretched with a yawn. It's been amazing catching up, but I think I need a solid week of sleep, he admitted with a grin. Thank you for dinner, and for making me feel so welcome. He stood and shook Walter's hand firmly. June stepped in for a lingering hug, her eyes shining with emotion. Don't be a stranger, Caleb, she said gently. To his surprise, she kissed his cheek before stepping back with a warm smile. Caleb smiled and turned toward his truck. Nora hugged her parents goodbye, then hurried after him, slipping her arm through his. At the truck, Caleb opened the passenger door, only to blink in confusion as Nora climbed in without hesitation. Nora? What are you doing? Her expression was a blend of nerves and certainty. I'm coming with you, she said simply. I told Mom and Dad already. I want to be with you. If that's not okay, I'll understand, but this is what I want. Caleb paused, his thoughts catching up with his heart. You know I love you, and I'd love nothing more than to bring you home with me tonight. But are you sure this is what you want? We should think this through, about what people might say, what your parents or neighbors might think. I want you with me. I just want to make sure this feels right for you. Nora's smile softened. Caleb, this is right. I've known I loved you since before you deployed. I didn't get the words out before you left, but I should have. Today, I told Lacey you're my man, and I meant it. I don't just want to spend the night with you. I want a life with you. You make me feel like I'm finally where I belong. Caleb studied her face for a long, quiet moment. Then, without a word, he climbed in and started the engine. As they pulled away, he glanced back at the farmhouse. Walter and June stood together in the glow of the porch light, arms around each other, watching them go. June leaned into Walter, and both gave a quiet wave. Caleb nodded in return before turning onto the road. Nora scooted closer, resting her head on his shoulder and her hand lightly on his thigh. Back at the house, they walked arm in arm to the door. Caleb dropped his duffel on the floor and started digging through it, tossing items aside until he found his right combat boot. He turned it upside down. A small black box hit the floor. Nora watched with wide eyes as he picked it up. I was going to wait, Caleb said, holding the box in his palm. But now that you're here, it feels like the right time. He opened it. A simple, elegant ring sparkled under the hallway light. Nora, he said, steady and sure. I've told you I love you. I plan to do this soon, but if we're sharing a home, it should be official. Will you marry me? Tears welled in Nora's eyes. She nodded, trembling, holding out her left hand. Caleb slid the ring on carefully. The moment he let go, she threw her arms around him, whispering into his neck. Yes, Caleb Whitaker. I'll marry you. I've wanted this for so long. From the moment we met, you made me feel like more than just some woman with scars. You made me feel seen, like a real partner. I love you for who you are and how you see me. She pulled back slightly, her eyes locked on his. Now, she added with a teasing grin, we should probably get some rest. Tomorrow we've got to stop by Dad's, show off this ring, and pick up more of my stuff. Caleb blinked. More of your stuff? Nora blushed. I hope you don't mind, but I already moved a lot of my clothes here. While you were gone, this place started to feel like home. I've been staying here to look after things, and honestly, it feels more like ours than just yours. Caleb laughed. Well, I guess that settles it. They headed to the bathroom, sharing a quick, playful shower before tumbling into bed. Their passion reignited, fueled by love, longing, and shared history. This time wasn't rushed or desperate, it was complete, full of tenderness and trust. Afterward, Nora curled into him, her body warm against his, her arm draped protectively over his chest. Caleb exhaled deeply, a smile forming on his lips. He had never felt more at home. As dawn filtered through the bedroom curtains, Caleb stirred. Careful not to wake Nora, he slipped out of bed and headed to the bathroom. When he returned, the sheets were empty. He wandered into the kitchen and found her there, barefoot and glowing, hair tousled and loose as she brewed coffee. She looked up and smiled. Why don't you sit on the porch and enjoy the morning? I'll bring your cup in a minute. Caleb nodded and stepped outside into the fresh morning air. The sun had just begun to rise, casting golden rays through the mist dancing over the stream. Birds chirped in the trees. Somewhere nearby, a tractor hummed alive. The low bellow of cattle mingled with the sound of water trickling over stones. It was quiet, gentle, alive. Caleb inhaled deeply and let the peace settle over him like a blanket. A moment later, Nora appeared beside him, handing him a steaming mug and sitting down with her own. She was just as bare as he was, radiating calm. They sat in silence for a while, sipping their coffee, watching the world wake up. Caleb turned to her with a smile. "You know," he murmured, "I never really believed in fate. But sitting here with you, in this home, after everything we've been through, I think I finally understand it." Nora leaned into him. "Then I guess fate got it right." Nora slid her chair closer to the porch railing, giving Caleb a playful look. "So," she teased, tilting her head, "you see anything you like, soldier?" Caleb smirked. "Definitely. The view of the stream, and your dad's hayfield. I've really missed both." Nora gasped in mock offense, then broke into a grin. "You idiot. Maybe I should go inside and put clothes on, see how you like that." Caleb chuckled, giving her a deadpan look. "Let's not be hasty. Now that you mention it, there are plenty of things worth admiring out here. But teasing a man who's been in Afghanistan with no woman in sight for a year? That's risky. Might backfire." Nora leaned back, laughing. "I sure hope so. Let's finish this coffee, let things backfire, then grab breakfast and head to my parents'. Deal?" Caleb clinked his mug against hers. "Deal." After a brief nap, Nora got up to cook what Caleb proudly called a proper breakfast: biscuits, ham, eggs, hash browns, and strong coffee. Once they'd eaten, they dressed and drove to her parents' house, arriving just as Walter and June were sitting down for lunch. June stood to make 2 extra places, but Nora waved her off. "Mama, don't bother. We just finished breakfast. We're not hungry." June raised an eyebrow, her tone teasing. "Nora Bennett, what on earth were you doing all morning that Caleb had to wait until lunchtime to eat?" Walter snorted with laughter, earning a sharp glance from his wife. Realization dawned quickly, and June's cheeks flushed. "Oh," she muttered, turning back to her plate. Nora grinned. She poured 2 glasses of iced tea and handed one to Caleb with a quick kiss. Then, sitting beside her mother, she casually reached across the table, left hand forward. June's eyes widened, spotting the ring. She let out a squeal, grabbing Nora's hand to inspect it. After lunch, Nora helped her mother clear dishes while Caleb and Walter sat outside, catching up. When they finally headed home, the truck bed was loaded with Nora's things, her move made official. In the months that followed, Caleb and Nora blended their lives effortlessly. They worked the 80-acre farm together and helped maintain Nora's parents' land. Over the years, they assumed full responsibility for both properties, raising a family along the way. After the birth of their second child, they made a new decision, one that honored both families. Walter and June moved into Caleb's original cave home, while Caleb and Nora took over the larger house. Walter and June remained there for the rest of their days. Caleb retired from the Army Reserve after 40 years of service, leaving as a command sergeant major. Their youngest son eventually took over the daily farm operations, blending tradition with modern innovations, allowing Caleb and Nora to return to the cave home that had started it all. Now a peaceful retreat, it had become more than shelter. It was a place filled with stories, laughter, struggle, and love. Throughout his life, Caleb kept 3 promises. He vowed never to go back to Lacey, and never did. He vowed to love, honor, and cherish Nora, a promise he lived by every day. And he swore to Walter that he'd take care of her, a pledge that became his life's greatest joy. As the sun dipped low, casting golden hues across the fields, Caleb and Nora sat on their porch, hands intertwined. The stream below whispered its familiar tune. The land around them thrived, bearing witness to the legacy they'd built from sweat, loss, and love. Caleb leaned back, eyes scanning the property. "I never imagined it would turn out like this," he murmured, his voice touched with wonder. Nora smiled, her silver hair glowing in the soft light. "Neither did I. But every twist, every trial, it brought us here. I wouldn't change a thing." From the distance came the sound of laughter, children's laughter. Their grandchildren were down by the stream, likely learning to skip stones, just like Nora had once taught their own kids. Caleb spotted Levi, their youngest, standing nearby. Strong, steady, already proving himself capable of carrying the legacy forward. "Do you remember when we started?" Caleb asked. "I thought this cave wouldn't hold us through one winter." Nora chuckled. "And I told you it'd last a lifetime. Like us." She gave his hand a gentle squeeze. The cave, now polished and homey, held decades of memories. Late-night talks, stormy nights, quiet mornings over coffee, moments of doubt and triumph. The walls knew their secrets and kept them. Caleb turned to her. You've always been my anchor. No matter what came our way, you kept us steady. Nora met his gaze, eyes bright with feeling. And you've been my compass. You've always shown me where home is. As twilight deepened, Caleb reflected on the promises he'd made and kept. He'd let go of the past. He'd loved Nora without condition. He protected and cherished her every day. The years had etched lines into their skin, but their bond had only deepened. Their family was strong, their land fruitful, and their love, a quiet force, continued to shine for the next generation. Lights flickered on at the main house. Warm, steady, a symbol of everything they had built. Nora rested her head on his shoulder as the first stars appeared overhead. The sound of grandchildren, the hum of the stream, the gentle breeze, it was all as it should be. We've had a good life, Caleb said quietly. Better than I ever dreamed. Nora nodded, her voice soft. And it's not over. There's still more to give. More to enjoy. More to share. Caleb smiled and kissed her hand. As long as I have you, every day is a blessing. And so they stayed on the porch, watching night settle over the land they tamed with love. Together, they faced whatever came next, weathered by time, anchored by promises, and lit by a love that would outlast them both.